off-putting bits of that message, off-putting to conservatives. And so we're joined by a great group, which I'll tell you about in a second. But in terms of communicating with conservatives and Republicans, we're here to lobby. And so in many cases, you may be thinking it's about communicating with the members of Congress who are Republican or conservative. I would say that it's also about communicating with your friends and family. Because for us to be successful, although I'm very happy to see all those hands here today, we need to be much more oriented towards the center and not so much towards the left. And the more members we have that are from the right, the better. So the kinds of points that we'll be talking about today will be very useful to share with your friends and family, as well as when you're doing your lobbying. There was a quote that we heard from someone this morning. Oh, it was Mark. He was quoting a basketball coach. Quick, but don't hurry. When you're talking with conservatives, I would suggest that you drop quick. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And your role in developing more conservatives in this effort is to go slow at a pace where you can develop the relationship. And I also would say, how many of you have lobbied before? That's good. I'd say a little less than half haven't lobbied. Those of you that have lobbied know the story that I'm going to say, know it well. Those of you who have not, if you haven't, you can't appreciate that when you're going in, another group is coming out. And when you come out, another group's going in. And the group before you and the group after you have been sitting there across the table telling the congressperson or staff member why what they're there for is the most important thing for the congressman to be working on. They leave, we come in. This is the most important thing. We leave, the next one comes in. They have to deal with a 2-year cycle. They have limited political capital. This is true on the right and the left. And if we don't give them the good reason for them to get behind what we want and feel comfortable that it will be successful, they won't be around the next election to work on what we wanted to work on or work on any of the other things that their constituents are asking them to work on. So keep that in mind too, that this is a cycle that we need to be respectful of, and we need to take the time to make sure we develop the relationship. So I will take no more time and introduce our illustrious panel. Sitting right next to me is, as I said, the chair of the caucus, Dr. Rob Beggs.
Grant,
okay, can you hear me now? So next to me is the chairman of the Conservative Caucus, Dr. Rob Beggs, who got his PhD in biological systems engineering. That's not internal medicine. He is deeply involved in issues that relate to the climate. He's a GOP candidate, or GOP state delegate for California. And he's been active in CCL for a number of years, and has been a real strong leader in our conservative caucus, so we really appreciate the work he's done. Next to him is Sarah Hunt, who is the general counsel for the Niskanen Center. She has had a lot of policy, legal, and law work in New Mexico and Oregon, right? She works for Jerry Taylor, who wrote that article that so many of you really loved about bringing conservatives into the climate battle. So, Sarah Hunt. Katrina Rourke, next to her, all is deeply involved with these issues since you got out of school, and I think one of her first assignments was working for Bob Inglis, who you all know. And most recently, before she joined R Street, where she is now one of the senior policy fellows, although she doesn't look like a fellow to me. I hope that wasn't politically incorrect. American Action Forum, another libertarian right group to work on climate, but decided to move over to our street, so they're lucky to have her, and so are we to have her on the panel. So. And at the far end is my little brother, Alex Bosnowski, who I call that because he's been instrumental in helping me really connect with the Republican, conservative, libertarian groups in Washington, and has been a dedicated climate advocate from the right side from when he got out of school. And so he's here with Bob Inglis's group, ENEI, but also known as Republican. Alex Bosnowski. And at this time, I'm told I'm supposed to remind you to do your best to fill out the feedback cards that have been handed out. I would also take the opportunity to remind you to make sure that after this, I would suggest that if you haven't gotten your Metro card, to get your Metro card before you go to dinner, because if 900 of us try to get Metro cards tomorrow morning, and when there are only 8 Metro card machines, assuming they all work, it will take a long time. Yeah, that's correct. So let's get started. Enough about. So what we're going to do today, and I'm going to walk around with this microphone. Hear this? Hello? So I'm going to walk around with this microphone so that I can hand it to you, when you have questions. And we're really intending this to be a very interactive panel. The slides are meant to stimulate questions and to sort of give us a guide to talk about what we want to cover in the time. And I actually have a pointer here, I think.
It's the top one.
It's the top one? Oh. Doesn't matter. Anyway, you can read. Tony's going to show me how to use it. Approaches, how to answer questions, terms and messages to avoid. Look at that. Increasing lobby success. Increasing your success at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your friends and family. Help with perspective. And I think this is an important one. This gets back to what it's the marathon, not a sprint. It's not to win the argument, but it's to earn their support. Anybody have any questions on that? Yes.
Maybe premature to ask this early on in the session, but I'm Mike. I am Catholic. I kind of am conservative, but I'm in the best sense of the word, as stated on the first slide there. But one thing that has mystified me in the approaches that organizations like CCL have taken with the GOP and the conservative side is why the values that side espouses, to specifically life and liberty, haven't been framed in the context of protection of the environment, climate change, that kind of thing. In that, like even this encyclical that came out the other day. I mean, the Pope is very clear that there's a connection between the environment and life. That connection is very rarely made when it comes to what I have seen advocacy for the environment and approaches to talking to conservative. And the same goes with liberty. I mean, if climate change were to fully manifest itself, there'd be very little liberty for anybody. So I guess the question is how best to convey those values, make that connection between the values that I think all of us share in this room and the values that the conservative side shares.
Anything on the panel? I mean, this is what we'll be going over. Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and take that one.
Good question. I think the challenges are you bring up a couple of very broad concepts, and if you have time to talk to someone about those and get into depth about the nuances of, what does freedom and liberty mean and how that can affect you, that's great. What we typically focus on, though, is in the shorter term. Someone, I guess, I think it was the talk last night, talked about using energy freedom instead of energy independence. And energy freedom resonates really well with conservatives and libertarians. And so that's one aspect, where you could approach that. And as far as, liberty in the long run, it's important, but there's a whole lot of factors in between that, so it's hard to get into that level of discussion unless you have a lot of time and you're talking to, one of your relatives about it, at a party or something. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
One caution that I would add is you can't put the cart before the horse. We're all here because we believe that carbon is an externality, that is causing harm. If you are on the Hill in particular and you're talking to a junior level staffer, they don't actually think greenhouse gas emissions are a problem in a lot of Republican offices. So it's not that they don't care. It's just that they don't agree with our assessment of the risk associated with climate change. So I think you need to start at the very beginning and not jump to, why don't you care? Why don't you care about liberty? Why don't you care about life? Why don't you care about the capital that climate change is destroying? But just that you are in their office as a constituent to whom climate is the most important issue, that is what matters most in some of these offices.
I just want to point out two things, Mike. First, life wasn't part of the conservative platform until like the late 70s. So Ronald Reagan, when he's running for governor and running for president the first time, is a pro-choice candidate. And so what happens is the Catholic Church got really involved in the pro-life cause, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but the church has helped bring life into the fold, and now you're right to point out that it's very mainstream on the right. Maybe that can give us a little hope and optimism about climate change on the right and the role that the church might be able to play in the context of the encyclical. And then as to liberty, it's worth noting that you get socially programmed over time when you hear enough folks on the environmental left discuss policy solutions that appear to constrain liberty or regulate behavior or somehow increase the size of government and reduce the amount of choices people have. And you get used to hearing climate change and then something that takes away liberty. It's going to take us a little while to start reframing this in the context of, if we don't do something about climate change, it's the real threat to liberty.
Thanks. I think what I'd like to do is roll through, because I think we're going to cover some of these points. And I'm looking for questions during the process too, but we could spend the whole time on just this slide. And I think the next two slides, which are related and similar, I want to spend a little time on, because it's important for those of you who are not conservative to understand the triggers that one needs to avoid that don't really accomplish anything if you pull them. And you guys, go ahead and jump in on these, because I think that, yeah.
So I'm going to jump in on environmental justice or climate justice, because that's something, when the Pope talks about that, or church leaders do, I mean, that's really appropriate. And, I think that relates well. I think what you have to be careful of, at least in my state, California, when you talk to business people and companies, and they hear environmental justice, the first thing they think of is they're going to get hit with a third-party lawsuit. That's just the way it is. They think, well, we were going to do this project, but we got hit with an environmental justice lawsuit, so, And so think about the group you're talking to. If it's a faith group, if it's, charity group, that's great, that's perfect. If it's a business group, and it depends upon the state, think about that, whether that is appropriate to really push on that button or not.
So let's talk about saving the planet, which is a really noble idea, and I think everybody in this room wants to do that. but we should concede that there are several pathways to doing so. I think that conservatives really push back, as Alex was saying, on the solutions that the environmental movement has associated with the problem of climate change, for many good reasons, constrictions on liberty being among the top reasons there. So how do we talk about getting conservative principles on board to save the planet? Well, I think we can concede that a richer planet is a safer planet in the future, so let's commit to that. I think that we can concede that the federal government has a role to play in sort of setting the tone internationally, but certainly this vague and tenuous save the planet target is super loaded. Make your specific suggestions tied to conservative principles. That's how you win conservatives over, by showing them that they have the tools to meet this ambitious and big target. So it's really about bringing conservative chops to bear and reminding conservatives of all of the solutions that they've put up so far, which is every piece of environmental legislation that's ever been passed in the United States.
Talking about energy companies, coal, oil, other carbon-intensive fossil fuels from the ground. Prior to joining the Niskanen Center, I was in political consulting, and my clients were from these industries, and I would prep them on going in and engaging with regulators and politicians. And you will find when you go and, pardon? Sorry, I thought somebody was maybe asking me to speak up. You will find when you go, some of you probably have, when you go into a meeting, your congressman or their staff might say, well, what does coal think? What does oil think?